Among the endless cruelties of ancient times, one punishment stands apart, not for its speed, not for its spectacle, but for the revolting way it turned death into a slow, humiliating nightmare. It was called scaphism, an execution so vile that even in a world accustomed to blood and brutality, its very mention evoked disgust. The Persians devised it as a fate worse than death itself, a punishment for traitors and enemies, one meant not only to kill but to annihilate dignity, turning a man into living carrion. The victim was not stabbed or burned, nor given the quick release of the blade. Instead, he was stripped naked and forced between two narrow wooden boats or hollowed logs, his head, hands, and feet protruding while his body was trapped inside. He was then force-fed milk and honey until his stomach churned and bloated painfully, while his skin was smeared with more honey to attract the swarming insects of the marshes. There, beneath the blazing sun, the real horror began. At first, the condemned might struggle, sweating and gagging on the thick mixture forced into his body, but escape was impossible. Hours passed, then days, and with each one the swarms grew thicker. Flies, wasps, and beetles crawled over his exposed flesh, drawn to the honey, biting and stinging until his skin erupted in sores. Mosquitoes drilled into his eyes and lips, maggots burrowed into his wounds, and the bloated stench of sickness hung heavy in the air. This was no quick execution, it was a slow unmaking of a human being, where nature itself became the executioner. To those who witnessed it, scaphism was not only punishment but performance. The condemned man's cries echoed over stagnant waters, begging for mercy that would never come. Each day, soldiers returned to feed him more milk and honey, ensuring his body remained alive, bloated, and ripe for the feast of vermin. He was both prisoner and banquet, trapped in a coffin of wood, consumed piece by piece until his flesh was unrecognizable. For the ancient Persians, this was not merely death, it was degradation, designed to erase honor and turn man into filth. To be condemned to scaphism was to be stripped of humanity itself, a fate whispered as legend long after empires crumbled. It remains one of the most revolting chapters in the history of human cruelty, where the body became a cage, and the earth itself conspired in the torment. The true horror of scaphism lay not in the first day, but in the slow decay that followed. The victim, trapped in the wooden shell, could not escape the cycle of torment. His body, swollen from forced feeding, weakened under the relentless sun. Sweat poured down his skin only to mingle with the sticky honey, making him an irresistible lure for every insect in the marsh. Soon, flies clustered so thickly that his body looked less like flesh and more like a seething mass of wings and legs. As hours turned to days, the internal torment grew worse than the external. The milk and honey diet, forced down his throat, curdled inside him. His stomach swelled unnaturally, racked with diarrhea that leaked into the boat itself. The stench was unbearable, drawing more swarms of vermin. Insects crawled into his mouth, nostrils, and ears, laying eggs that hatched within open wounds. Worms gnawed from the inside while wasps stung him relentlessly from the outside. Historical accounts describe victims who lingered for over a week, their bodies eaten alive but their minds horrifyingly alert, trapped in a nightmare of awareness. Each moment of consciousness was another lash of torture, every breath a reminder that death was not yet willing to arrive. The marsh itself became an accomplice, its stagnant waters crawling with parasites that invaded the body through sores, burrowing deeper until rot set in. The condemned did not simply die, he decomposed alive. To the Persians, this was justice for the gravest crimes, a punishment reserved for traitors who betrayed the empire. But for the victim, it was worse than treason, worse than guilt, it was the stripping of humanity itself. He was no longer a man but a living feast, his body offered to the crawling creatures of the earth as a warning to all who dared defy the throne. Soldiers, priests, and commoners alike would speak of these executions in hushed tones, unable to shake the memory of the screams and the smell of decay. Scaphism became infamous precisely because it blurred the line between execution and torture, between man and corpse. Unlike a beheading, which ended in seconds, or even crucifixion, which lasted hours, scaphism turned days into endless torment, a process of death stretched until sanity itself collapsed. It was not just the most disgusting execution, it was one of the most inhumane, a grotesque performance where pain was drawn out until both the body and the spirit rotted together. When death finally came to those condemned to scaphism, it was not a swift release but a slow collapse into silence. By the time life left their body, the victim was often unrecognizable, their flesh consumed by insects, their features erased by decay. The boats that held them became coffins filled with rot, drifting in stagnant waters as grim monuments to cruelty. Soldiers who had overseen the ordeal often recoiled at the sight, unable to shake the memory of a man reduced to little more than bones, sludge, and stench. The psychological impact of scaphism was as powerful as the physical. Its purpose was not merely to destroy the body but to destroy identity. Victims did not die as warriors, nobles, or criminals, they died as food for vermin, stripped of dignity in every sense. To those who witnessed it or heard the tales, the horror lived on far longer than the condemned survived. It became a story whispered in fear, a punishment so disgusting that even other brutal executions paled in comparison. Historians debate how often scaphism was truly used. Some argue it may have been rare, perhaps even exaggerated by ancient writers to highlight Persian cruelty. Others suggest it was reserved for the most hated enemies of the empire, a punishment meant to terrify nations as much as individuals. Whether fact or legend, the accounts that survive are chillingly vivid, painting a picture of torment so extreme it hardly seems human. And that may be the greatest truth about scaphism, it was never simply about killing. It was about control, domination, and the spectacle of suffering. In a world where empires rose and fell by fear, nothing inspired obedience more than the sight of a man eaten alive by the creatures of the earth. It proved that the power of kings and emperors was not bound by morality, that their justice could be as foul as it was final. Today, the Iron Maiden, the breaking wheel, and the rack are remembered as instruments of terror, but scaphism endures as something darker. It is not only the most disgusting execution ever recorded, but one of the most haunting symbols of how far humanity can descend when cruelty becomes a tool of rule. Long after the empires that conceived it have turned to dust, the memory of scaphism lingers, a reminder that the most terrifying prisons are not built of stone or iron, but of human imagination turned monstrous.